Hey, web devs and creators, welcome back. Let's talk about meta conversations with clients. So we're going to learn about why is it important to have a meta conversation, when to have them. I'll share some examples of successful meta conversations and what to do with meta conversations when you're in the position of not owning your business. You're working as the employee or the consultant for a company that you don't own. First, let's start with defining it. What is a meta conversation? A meta conversation is not talking about the work that you're doing with the client. So you're not talking about the project that you're working on, the timeline, the specifics of the project. A meta conversation is focused on how you're working together. So how you work and also your working relationship and how that's going. So it often involves setting boundaries and expectations. A meta conversation is not usually initiated by the client. The client wants to talk about the project, the work, when it's going to be done, what it's going to look like, and so if you allow the client to drive your conversations, then you won't be having meta conversations. So it's on your plate to initiate meta conversations. So why are they important? So a meta conversation is hard to have. Or it can be, especially if you don't have practice, because you're frequently in a meta conversation needing to set a boundary with a client. And there can be, that can be difficult because you're not really sure how your client or even your prospect, maybe they're not even your client yet, you're not really sure how they're going to respond. And there's a little bit of fear but that they might respond negatively. So if they're so hard to have, why do we have them? I have found that. So here's why I have meta conversations, and I encourage my employees to have them as well. The reward of having meta conversations makes it worth it. So they are things as a result of having meta conversations, like here's my boundaries, here's the expectations, here's what you can expect from me, here's the best way to work with me, here's how what you just said comes off. Those types of conversations, hard to have, but they are so rewarding, and they actually make future work with that client so much easier. Um, the other thing that can happen that's also good is a meta conversation can prevent a client from becoming your customer, your client, a prospect from becoming your client. So there are certain people that you don't want to be your client. And those are the ones that are demanding, overly demanding, especially. You don't want abusive clients. You don't want clients who don't respect your boundaries or, all of these, right? And so the sooner you can have that meta conversation with that particular prospect or client, the faster it is they go away. They want to terminate the relationship. And we're okay with that, right? We're okay with not having lousy clients. This video isn't for you if you want to hang on to those clients. And if you have fear about that, that's a different video. So it's also meta conversations can really change your relationship with a client and for the better. And so the sooner that happens, the better, right? And sometimes you have to circle back and keep having a meta conversation. And if there's enough time in between, that might be okay. But if you just keep repeatedly having to bring up problems, then there may be a different set of decisions that you have in front of you about whether or not to terminate the relationship. But what if you're in the middle of a big project, right? And suddenly the behavior of the client changes, and you're like let's say you're more than halfway through. Well, the first thing I want to say is that almost never happens. So usually people show themselves and their behavior patterns before a project even begins, right? So that you can have these conversations as soon as possible. So if though you wait to have a meta conversation with your client until like well into a project, then you've kind of created it's become more difficult, right? Because all along you've been tolerating, and now you want to have this conversation. So it's not too late though, right? Especially if you come to the meta conversation willing to let that client go and lose money. So I have found myself in situations where I have let things go on too long, and I've had to bring that conversation to a moment of, we don't have to continue working together. I'm willing to give you all of your money back. Now, of course, I'm not going to deliver the assets and the deliverables, right? But I'm willing to let go of the relationship. And the response from the client is usually either going to be, no, I want to keep going. I want to keep working with you. And with that, they'll agree to change and respect whatever your boundary is that you're setting. Other people will actually take you up on that offer. They will say, yeah, let's not continue working together. And that actually doesn't happen very often. It happens, but it's rare, because usually the client is also invested. They've invested time. They've invested more than just money. So, and even though you can give them their money back, you can't give them their time back. And so it's not a great deal for either party, you or your client. But it's the best you can come up with, maybe. And so it's rare though that's where this has to go. You may be surprised at how often people are willing to respect your boundaries when they know what they are. That's key. They have to know what your boundaries are. And then this often will save a project, right? So a project can end up being more successful, and you end up being happier as well. So this is why you want to have these meta conversations, right? They're hard to have, but if you want to have successful projects, happier clients, and you to have a happier working life, that's why you want to have them. You want to have these meta conversations. They're incredibly rewarding when you decide to have them. And it's rewarding even when you have to say goodbye to a client. That's actually turns out it's a good thing. Then you can open up your schedule for the clients who are a good match for you and who will respect your boundaries. It's hard to work with those great clients if your time is being taken up by a different client who doesn't respect your boundaries. So, when is the right time to have these meta conversations with clients? So you're going to have these throughout your relationship with a client, and the first meta conversation that you're going to have with a client is at onboarding. And so, or it may even be during the sales process, but it's going to be right at the beginning. And that is ideally a document. So on my team, we share a document with all of our clients, and it's titled "How I Work." So it's, hey, we're getting started. Here's how I work. And the message of this document is positive, and it includes it's very much, here's how to get have the best relationship. Here's how for us to have the best relationship and for you to get the most out of your investment in my services. So it's very client centered, in the tone, right? Here's how to get the best results working with me. And that's going to include, what the client can expect from you, all the good things, right? That a client can expect from you. And so it's going to be good news, right? So it's not like, don't do this. It's not a don't list. It's not a don't do this to me, don't do that, don't do that. It's very positive, and here's all the great things that you can count on me for, and it's going to include boundaries, like here's my availability, the quickest, here's how I, here's the way to reach me in event of an emergency, right? If you have that type of service that you provide, like a website emergency is what I mean. So if the website is crashed and down, don't email me, call our office number, because that's the one that's answered quickly, because that's also our sales line, right? So if your website is down, don't email me. I might not be looking at my email. Don't text me. Call our office phone number, right? And that's going to get the quickest response. So that's an example of the type of, you're providing instruction, things that you may take for granted in terms of how you work. Don't assume that your client understands how to be your client, right? So educate them on how to be your client and what to do in different situations. And so that right there is a great foundation for getting started with a client. But you can also return to it, right? So we don't have, like, for example, we don't have our clients sign off, right? Like, oh, I read and agree to these terms, right? That we don't really feel like that's necessary. But we do make sure that that meta conversation is in writing, and will confirm in a Zoom or phone conversation that they received it. The sooner the better, because if a client reads anything on that document that doesn't really sit well with them, it's not going to work. Oh, we thought you were available 24/7. We really need someone who can be on call 24/7. Well, it's good we found out, right? That we got that information right up front. None of us on our team are available 24/7. That's not how we work. Someone else is going to be a better fit for them. So we got that out there really, really quick, right? So sometimes a client will have to move on as a result of receiving that initial meta conversation document, right? How I work. So if you don't have that, make that, right? So I'm going to, I'm going to provide a link to a sample how I work document, so that you can feel free to use it. So look for the link where you can download that document and edit it for your own use, so that you can, so you can put this together easily. So look for that link. Okay. So some examples. So when to have them. So one time, right? What we just talked about is right at the beginning, right? That how I work. But then the rest of from there, the meta conversations come up kind of on an as needed basis. So how do you know when you need to have a meta conversation? So usually it's when, and hopefully it's before you start getting that feeling of that you're not being respected. Hopefully it's before that, or right at that moment. And ideally, right? The more practice you get, the quicker you'll get to these meta conversations. So practice is key. And so some examples of where you're going to want to stop, pause. Hey, let's talk about our relationship, right? Or let's schedule a meeting where we talk about how we work together, right? So you can even schedule it. You don't always have to have it instantly. But sometimes you do have to stop what's going on and have that meta conversation on the fly right now. It's easier to do that when you've created that how I work document in advance so that you're not making stuff up off the, oh, that's news to me, right? Or so you can have more confidence in talking about these when you know your boundaries. So if you don't know your boundaries, that's some homework you have to do. You have to know how you're willing to work, what your limits are, how far you're willing to go. So let's take some examples here. So let's say you're in an email. Let's say there's an email conversation, and a client in their email is questioning the kind of implying that you're taking too much time, like or to do the work, and saying it in such a way that you'll hear phrases like, or read phrases like, this should only take you a few minutes, or I could do this in 10 minutes, or I could hire someone on Fiverr to get this done in 10 minutes, right? Or, you know what I'm talking about, right? Because this is actually a really common one. And so let's say you get that by email. We frequently get it in a conversation as well, but let's say you get that kind of message in an email. That's your cue for a meta conversation, right? So, because you're like, whoa, that's like totally disrespectful. And so how do you respond with that? So on our team, a meta conversation ideally is not via email. So it's really important. Connect on Zoom, get that, because the reason we don't have these important, difficult conversations by email is so much can get lost in translation when we're talking about trying to communicate through email. So, or text. You know what I'm talking about. We need to see each other's faces over Zoom or hear our tone of voice, over the phone. So that, really supports the conversation. So don't try to have meta conversations over email or text. So that's your cue to respond with, hey, I want to respond, right? You want to first say, I want to respond to your concern. Get that out of the way. I want to respond to your concern. Let's have this conversation over the phone. It's really important to have this conversation over the phone. Does this day and time work for you? Or do these days or any of these days or times work for you? And wait for them to schedule that time with you. What if they keep trying to have the conversation by email? Right? Because that happens. Sometimes people just ignore, right? So you keep broken record treatment. You keep responding. I want to respond to you. Let's get on the phone. Let's get on Zoom. Do any of these days or times work for you? This other one now doesn't work, or something like that, right? So have that, and then that conversation. Hey, thanks for making this time for me, with me. Let's talk. I want to respond to your, again, repeating, right? I want to respond to your concern. And specifically your concern about the amount of time it takes me to do my work. I think, it's right. So we're just getting right to it, right? We're not talking about the project at all. and the client may kind of go into the project because that's comfortable. That's where they want to talk. That's what they want to talk about, is the project. So you're verbalizing, I want, which they may not have the courage to do, or maybe they do, right? They're just kind of blatantly suggesting that you're too slow, or that you're not respecting their time or their budget. And so that's what you want to start with, is that, this is, I want to talk about the things that you said about time, and that maybe other people can do this work faster, right? You just want to repeat it back, what they've said to you. Because sometimes people don't hear what the words that they're saying, or they don't really, or if they wrote them in an email, when they hear it repeated back to them, they can hear how insulting it is, right? So you have to repeat it back to, I just want to respond to that piece first before we continue. This is really important. When you make statements like that about how long it takes for me to do my work, that I'm not doing it quickly enough, it doesn't sit well with me. And so let's talk about that. So you can count on me to be honest with you about how much time it takes for me to do work. Can we move forward? And can you trust me that when I tell you how much time it takes me to do a project, that I'm being honest? And so boom, we're getting right into it, right? So and then the client is either going to apologize, correct, or they may even deny, right? Like, oh, that's not what I meant. Oh, and so then the response from you may be positive, like, I'm so glad to hear that's not what you meant. I want you to know that's how it came across. So even if that's not what they meant, that's how it came across. And so sometimes people just need that education from you. And we're not being defensive at all, right? We're not raising our voice. We're being direct. And that's key. Saying what it is, how it came across, and that's taking responsibility for your feelings about what happened. So those are yours. And so not only are you doing that, you're not just letting that kind of rotten egg sit there. You're providing a solution, right? So the solution is start trusting me when I say that this is how much time it takes. Trust me. That's the solution. And so if they can't go there, if they can't embrace that solution, then, if they can't agree to that solution that you provide, then should they be working with you, right? So it's going to go in one direction or another. They can, be willing to change, right? And agree to the solution. And even when they deny, you can still present the same solution, right? Because, this is really, something that, they can even be in denial, and you can still say, can we agree that you're going to trust me that I'm telling the truth? Right. So, and they're going to, so the answer is really yes or no. No, I can't. Right. Sometimes a client will say that, but rarely will they do that. Usually when a client is talking, they may not trust you, or they may just have a lot of fear. Right. And so what's more trustworthy than to have these honest, hard conversations? That's so, like, it makes you a more trustworthy person, right? And sometimes a client will even apologize, right? So they don't, but it's probably not the first time that they've had this kind of dynamic. You're not the only one that they treat this way. They treat all professionals this way. Maybe you're the only professional who's been willing to bring it up, right? Directly. That makes you, if they continue in the relationship with you, that makes you the one that they trust, right? Because you're being real. And so that's where the reward comes in, because the relationship changes for the better as a result of these meta conversations. And so they can be very reinforcing to have, even when a client exits, right? It may feel like they exited quickly and without good reason. And we hate to see clients make decisions that are not in their own best interest when it comes to their business. But sometimes they do. And it can be, kind of sad, right? Because we get invested in our clients. We want them to be successful, but we also need to protect ourselves. Okay, so that's the example of the client who questions your price and your time, right? And if you can kind of get that to show up in the sales process, like before they even become your client, and have that conversation even at that point, that's great. So, because then they may not even get in the door, right? We want to stop those people from getting in the door, ideally. Sometimes people sneak in though. But yeah, have that conversation as soon as possible. Okay, so another example that frequently calls for a meta conversation is the client who is either demanding or very needy of your time. So they're wanting to have meetings all of the time, and maybe they're a big idea person, right? And they've got a new idea and a new idea and a new idea, right? That's great, and they're excited about it, and they want to share it with you and see what you have, and they want your consultation, your expertise, and so what's really important here is that you know what time you have available, right? And so to communicate that clearly, um, and to make it clear right up front, as soon as possible when it's so let's say you have a limited amount of time that you have available to a client before you start charging additional, right? And so then you have this client that's asking for a lot of time, um, and it can be a difficult conversation to pause and say, hey, I want you to know we have a specific schedule for how we communicate. And I enjoy hearing from you, right? I like these conversations. But I also want you to be aware that some of these conversations that we have, I'm invoicing you for. So before I do that, I don't want that to come out of the blue, right? I'm respecting your time and your budget, and so I just want you to be aware that this consultation time that we have is billable on on my end, that you'll receive overage or whatever, and if a and so that like this is one where someone can get really pissed off and accuse you of nickeling and diming, right? So that's what you might hear is like, why are you nickeling and diming me for questions or conversations, right? And so that can kind of hurt my feelings when I hear that kind of thing. Um, so the best way so it's as quickly as possible. So what's tempting is to allow that to continue, right? To let it slide. And and then that's where it kind of, so then the client gets used to it. Like they become accustomed to how quickly you respond, and how many meetings they can have with you. I mean, and then it kind of feels like the rug gets pulled out from under them when all of a sudden they hear that you're going to charge them. So this conversation about your availability and your time, I mean, this can really be covered in that how I work document. But let's say they ignored it, right? And as soon as possible, you want to remind them of how accessible you are. And you, on your side, it's really important to not instantly respond to everything, right? You remember, you're teaching your client how to work with you and how available you are. And your fear might be, well, what if they are upset with me for not responding instantly? Or what if they don't want to be my client anymore because I take 24 hours to respond when they've asked me a question by email? Or let's say you've said, thanks for sending this to me. I will be working on this I'll have this done by Monday next week, right? Or something, instead of like today, right? So that can be your fear, right? Or as the service provider, that is this fear that they get upset with us. Well, how realistic is that for if you have a full client load for you to be, so available, right? Without pay. without getting paid for this additional time. So that's the key, because maybe you can be more available to this client. Maybe this client wants to pay you for all this extra time that would then actually make it worth it, right? So there's a premium price for that level of access to you. You don't want to be giving that away for free. But remember, you're training your client, and you don't want to train them that you are just available all the time, and that and the amount of time that you're available is, whatever. You're helping them right from the get-go, because you don't want a client to feel like, oh, I didn't realize you were doing me a favor all this time, right? So here's what you do. Anytime that right off the get-go that you feel that is above and beyond, going over, document that on their invoice. And the first week, or if you don't have that conversation immediately, and maybe it just happens and one time or a couple of times, and you're not quite sure yet if this is like boundary busting, right? Maybe you're not sure yet, but and so what you do is any additional time that's above and beyond what you would normally offer, and let's say you haven't had this conversation of, I'm going to charge you for this, right? And so you want to at least note it on the invoice, and the amount of time, and note the price of that. And you may choose to waive the price of that, like the first time, right? So you're not, and so that'll be like, oh, that thing that took time, and I'm not paying for it this time. So that when you do have to charge the client for your additional time, and you've had this conversation, and they're like, well, what's this extra time for, right? Or why are you charging me for that? Well, and then you can kind of refer back to, well, in the past I have waived that, right? This is time that I charge for. This is my expertise. This is my consultation. And so we really want to go right into those situations where the client will either start respecting, right, and respecting your limits, or they'll exit, right? So again, don't want to hang on to those clients who don't respect us, right? And we also have to take our part, our responsibility, and recognize how we contribute to some problematic relationships with our clients, because we're giving them stuff for free, our time for free, and we're not noting it, and they're oblivious to it, right? And that's our fault. So so those are a couple of examples. A final example that I want to provide today is the client that becomes abusive. So that is, and we've had that. Sometimes and sometimes an abusive client will show up after they've come on board, right? It would be nice if they would show themselves for who they are before they become our client. But sometimes that abusive client shows up after they've come on board. And here's a situation that we've run into a few times. It's where your point of contact is not the final decision maker, but your usual person that you work with understands how to work with you. They respect your boundaries. But you have a CEO that steps in, shows up on some of the calls or meetings, and the CEO is abusive and demanding, and wants to treat you like they're your employee. And so that is, the source of that is frequently that's a CEO style. That's how they operate. They're a bully. They're just treating you the way they treat everyone, right? And so as a result, they have the type of people that they surround themselves with don't confront them, don't push back. They kowtow to the bully, and so that's who they're surrounded by, and frequently this is I'm generalizing, right? But and so they're not used to getting feedback on their behavior, right? And so you're going to be different when you're bullied. It's like it's kind of scary, and it can be hard to respond. It is hard to respond, and sometimes you don't think about or recognize that you were bullied until after the meeting, right? Maybe you had the meeting, and then you reflect on that. Maybe you talk to your boss or a colleague, and you're like, whoa, I think that I was just being bullied there. Or maybe your boss says, hey, you were being bullied. Right? So and you don't have to put up with that. If you find yourself like just feeling terrible, or like, really emotional after a call, that's a sign that meta conversation here. And before you can do anything else, have this conversation, label it. I felt bullied, right? I felt bullied in this situation. Um, and you want to say, I can't have that happen again. But you have to be real specific about what was said or done. And this can't happen by email. So it needs to happen in a conversation. And if you need to bring someone else onto the call with you for a reality check or whatever, to validate, to confirm, do that. If you need to record the conversation, do that via Zoom, right? And so you might wonder if, oh, well, that person, the bully, as soon as you confront them, they're gonna like terminate the relationship immediately. And and that would actually be nice. What we found though is what happens instead is frequently the bullying CEO will actually step back. They'll apologize. They'll promise not to do it again. And then sometimes, not always, but sometimes it happens again. And it keeps happening, right? And then, so if it happens, so at any point when you're dealing with a bully, and you've done your part where you've brought it up, that's key. It's really important for you to do your part. Brought it up as an issue, and that's something that, hey, going forward, I don't tolerate, whether you have to say specifically what it was. I don't tolerate being yelled at, being called names. It's abusive, and I also dictate when I have meetings. I'm a consultant and an expert. I'm not an employee, so I don't operate as your employee. I determine my schedule, and if you have, like, sometimes the CEO will say, well, we're going to meet on these days, and we're going to meet this often, and so that's also a form of bullying, right? So you want to speak specifically about what doesn't work for you, right? And so, like I was saying, sometimes the behavior stops and the pattern gets better, or maybe they drop out completely and allow you to continue working just one-on-one with their employee who is more respectful of you. But at any time, you don't have to wait for the client to be on board and agree with terminating the relationship. At any time, you can make that decision yourself to terminate the relationship, and that can be hard. You also have to be prepared, though, with that termination of the relationship, is to lose some money. Because frequently a client will want their money back because you're not completing the project, right? So, and I have found that that's rare that has to happen, but when it does, it's such a relief. And the money comes back in terms of new clients. And because you're not as stressed out, you have time for new clients. And so that's been my experience. It's been very rewarding to let go of some clients, to terminate the relationship, um, and um, and just to be very direct about it. It's not working out. This is not working out. Our working relationship is not a positive one. We've talked about it, and I'm not seeing the change that I need to see happen. So I'm terminating the relationship. You don't even really have to, go into all the reasons. It's not really necessary. Yeah. So, and in that, you're going to want to talk about like how to terminate, right? You're going to want to, maybe you will be providing some of the assets that you've created, and you'll be holding, and that'll be in exchange for not refunding them all their money, right? Maybe it's just a partial refund of their money. So that might be like a conversation, or they might be like goodbye, and that's it. And just be prepared for that. And you might say, well, no, we have a contract, we have an agreement. I'm not giving them their money back, but I'm only giving them part of their money back, and they're just going to have to live with it. But what I think you should know, if you don't know this already, is that the customer has the upper hand when it comes to being able to get their money back. So if you have any experience with chargebacks, the customer always wins, even with a contract. And very few projects are you really going to be willing to hire a lawyer for in order to battle over a contract. so, so also bring realism to your actions, right? So it's frequently going to be easier to let go and to take that loss of money. Other situations, not. You're going to battle it, and you're going to bring an attorney in, and you're going to make sure you have that contract enforced, and that'll just be a case by case situation. But know with yourself, like what option is going to be worth it to you. We found on our end is we're relieved to not have a relationship with a client who's abusive or won't respond to our boundary setting, which is abusive. so we just don't want abusive clients. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about what if you're an employee and you are providing services for an employer, and you have a slate of clients that you're serving, but you're not the business owner, or you're a consultant, or so at my company, my team members have within their power to terminate a relationship, and it will be at a lot, and they will continue. So they are protected at my company. They will still get paid for the time that they worked on the project, and so that's a protection that I offer to my team. Now, why would I do that? So instead of saying, hey, it's, figure it out, work it out. That's like what a lot of businesses do. Work it out, right? You have an obligation to get the job done. And especially since I'm paying you, that kind of thing, right? Well, we don't have that attitude at my company. It's really a good thing, because I want my employees to be happy. I want my employees to be committed to working at my company and not be looking to go working someplace else where they're treated better. And I want to have a good relationship. So I want with my employees. So I have their back. So they don't have to tolerate abusive clients. And what I ask in return from my team is that they be willing to have these meta conversations right from the get-go. So that's something that I trust them to do first, right? Or if they haven't done that, I will send them to do that, right? So have these meta conversations It's not first step, cut the relationship off, right? That's not the first step. And so I trust my team to have these conversations all along the way and when they do that, if they're, if they have done all of the right things, then it makes it a lot easier for me to have their back. So, because frequently those meta conversations can solve the problem, right from the get-go. But if there's been no conversations like this going, and it's then all of a sudden, oh, I don't like this project, I want to quit on the project, I want to walk away from it, that doesn't sit well with me, because I'm still paying my employee, right? So I have this trust with my employees that they'll have those conversations, and they do. So it works out really well. There are still situations where we need to exit a client, and that happens. Totally worth it. No regrets, because we as a result have a great team, great clients at our company, and now what do you do? So if you're an employee, what do you do? So my recommendation is that you have this conversation with the business owner or the supervisor that you work with, the person that pays your check. And this may not be possible if you work in big corporate America, right? But if you work for an agency, or you're the consultant for an agency, make this a conversation to have. Hey, what's the policy when with abusive clients? Right? What's the policy to handle abusive clients? Are abusive clients tolerated? Ask that question. It's totally legit. And I'd be surprised if the answer were, yes, we tolerate abusive clients. What's more likely is they've never thought of that they've never had anyone ask them that question. And ideally you're going to have that conversation early before you have an abusive client, right? So that you already know what the process is. What's this? What do we do when there's an abusive client? What's the policy? Is there, and what happens when they don't correct their behavior? And maybe there's no policy in place. And so simply by asking this question, it can prompt or spur the creation of a policy. And by taking the lead on bringing it up, maybe you can help with the crafting of that policy, or influence it, or make suggestions about the policy. So have that conversation and find out what are the boundaries. And then you can decide, hopefully you can decide whether or not that is a healthy work environment for you. My hope is that it is. I also hope that this conversation that we've had today about meta conversations with clients can expand into the rest of your life. These meta conversations are valuable, not just with clients, but also with employers, with colleagues, coworkers, with family and friends. So, so again, look for the link for our onboarding document called How I Work to download your free copy. Leave a comment or any questions or any situations that I actually haven't considered yet. Maybe, I'm not perfect. So if there are situations that I'm not taking it into account, I'd love to hear what they are. Let's brainstorm. Let's talk about the situations where meta conversations come up. If you have your own experience with a meta conversation, I would love to hear about it. Tell us what happened, how it went. That would be awesome. I'd love to see, did it go south? Did good things happen? So, all right, I'll see you next time.